Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. This is our special Easter program that focuses on the historical, religious and cultural relationship between Armenian and Ethiopian community, besides the obvious relationship that emanates from the Orthodox Orientalism, that is Oriental Orthodoxy, that most countries has followed in history. Do you happen to know that Armenians are the first shofars, the first translators and the first dwellers here in Ethiopia? Besides that, Armenians coined us some of the names for the villages in Addis Ababa. For example, Saratenya Sefer has been named by Armenians. Sabara Babur has been also named by the Armenians. Armen Sefer is also the other village that has been named by the Armenians. Armenians has a lot of impact in Ethiopian history. In the industry sector, the one shoe that we have been using has been created by a factory set up by Armenians, that is Darmar, which has been in the hands of Anbasa Shoe Factory. And Hag-based conglomerate is also created by Armenians as well. In order to delve and shed light on this and many more, I've sat down with a deacon from the Armenian church around Piazza, that is St. George Church of the Armenians, that is Deacon Vatkas Nalbaldian. Do stay with us. Deacon Vatkas Nalbaldian, thank you for blessing us with your time, and happy Easter.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk about the history of the Armenians of Ethiopia and the practice of the Armenian Orthodox Church.
History tells us that Armenian community and Ethiopian community have a lot of relationship. So I want you to take us through the people-to-people ties between the two communities, especially the loyalty that they have throughout the emperors in Ethiopia. Starting from the 16th century, we can go to Johannes IV, Emperor Menelik II, and Haile Selassie I. Please take us through the history and the ties between the two communities.
There is a very strange, unexplainable affinity between the two people. The reasons may be because of our faith, similar faith in our Lord Jesus Christ, or perhaps it should be looked into the DNA of the people, where these people who have nothing common geographically or culturally have an affinity towards each other. So it's a very strange relation, which most probably we have to give credit to our belief in Jesus Christ. Going over to the loyalty of Armenians towards the emperors of Ethiopia, this goes back to the 16th century. Armenians traded with Ethiopia and also traded for Ethiopia. The Ethiopian monarchs trusted Armenians to go and make purchases for the courts, for the armies, for clothing, and also bringing in spices and so on. So this trade relation grew stronger, and particularly Negist Eleni, who was the grandmother of Emperor Lubne Dengel. Lubne Dengel was very young when Queen Eleni decided to send Matthias to Portugal. Matthias, known in the Ethiopian historical history as Matthias Armanawi, he went via Goa to Portugal where he stayed 7 years. And in 1943, this was in 1515, and as you know, the Ethiopian history, in 1543, the diplomatic relation he had formed with King Manuel of Portugal resulted in Christopher da Gama coming to bringing soldiers to Ethiopia to fight against the expansion of the Ottoman influence in East Africa. Apart from Ethio Armenian, there was Murat Hoxha, who was sent to the Mughal Empire in India twice, and twice to Batavia. Probably the first one was on a diplomatic mission. He was sent by Emperor Fasilides, and probably it was connected with the construction of Gondar, and Fasilides achieved in Gondar. Murat Hoxha also took diplomatic missions for Emperor Iohannis I and Emperor Ieyasu II. So he has served the Ethiopian monarchs for 70 years. And he died in Gondar. So, apart from Murat Hoxha, his nephew Murat Çelebi was sent by Emperor Ieyasu to the court of Louis XIV, Louis XIV in French. So, but he never made it to Paris because when in Alexandria, he was not allowed to go to France because of permit issues. Initially, the French government had said okay for the envoy of Ethiopia to go to France, but later their policies had changed and they didn't allow Murat Çelebi to go to, who stayed 2 years in Alexandria and was looked after the French consul. And when he was ready to come back to Ethiopia because his French colleague had returned from France, they faced a lot of difficulties, and Emperor Tekle Haymanot wrote a very strong complaint letter to the Pasha of Cairo for the mistreatment of his envoy Murat Çelebi. So, as you see, the loyalty towards the royals goes back. After that, we have had a gentleman an Armenian from Tbilisi, named Bethlehem, who served Ethiopian emperors. Then Empress Mentuab had a courtier, an Armenian courtier, who served him and looked after her grandson, Emperor Ioas. So the history repeated itself for many centuries until Worke Garabed of Armenian descent, who served the Jazmat Sabagades, and later he came to Showa, serving father of Emperor Menelik, Negus Sahle Mariam. And the history of Armenians is connected with Ethiopia a lot. And then Worke Garabed had 3 sons educated in Bombay, who became advisors to different rulers of Ethiopia. They also, because they were educated in English in Bombay at the time, they were used as interpreters for the Napier expedition. And later, Iohannis Worke was sent to England to Queen Victoria as an envoy of the Jazmach Kasa, and later Emperor Ioannis IV. So there were 4 families living in Adwa during that time, but their descendants have remained unknown to the Armenian community and to the Ethiopian history. At the time of Emperor Menelik, Emperor Menelik encountered 3 Armenians who served him from the beginning. The first one was, before I go to there were envoys who came to Ethiopia on behalf of the British government to ask Emperor Theodoros to release the prisoners in Magdala. But their journey took 2 years, and before they reached Magdala, the British had already solved the problem militarily. And on their way back, they encountered some problems with Emperor Taklahaimanot or Taklagorgis anyway. And then the Jazmach Kasa, Emperor Ioannis IV, who questioned these envoys who were clergy from the Armenian Church of Jerusalem. And when Emperor Ioannis was satisfied that they were genuinely non-Catholic, they were genuinely Orthodox, he asked the Archbishop to head the Ethiopian Church. The Archbishop declined the offer, but secured the entry of Armenians to Ethiopia. And 2 years after they left Ethiopia, the first Armenian settler came to Ethiopia, Boğos Markaryan. Boğos Markaryan was an adventurer. He was a very close advisor to Emperor Ioannis, and Emperor Ioannis sent him to Menelik II, and in between he became pro-Emperor Menelik and remained in Shewa with Emperor Menelik. Although initially he was interested in business, but later he ended up as an envoy, and he was sent to Egypt twice, to the court of Ismail Pasha, for an agreement between Menelik and the Egyptians, which Emperor Ioannis didn't like. Finally, Boğos Markaryan remained with Emperor Menelik until 1908. Then he went to Zukwala, where he had a big plantation of eucalyptus trees, 100,000 eucalyptus trees, and he built the St. Mary Church there, and where he is buried. Emperor Menelik also had 2 other encounters with Armenians. One was Dikran Ebeyan, who made his crown, and the crown of Empress Taitu, and Sarkis Terzian, who helped him with the capitulation of Harar. And with these encounters, Emperor Menelik had a big positive attitude towards the Armenian and sent Ras Makonnan to the Middle East to bring some Armenians to Ethiopia. That's how the Armenian community of Ethiopia grew. It was initiated in Harar, and it later came to Addis Ababa. And there are no Armenians now anywhere in Ethiopia except Addis Ababa.
In 1924, that is September 24, 1924, history tells us that Haile Selassie I, that is Emperor Haile Selassie I, took a step which was bold in order to bring 40 children, Arbaoth Chuljoch, in the history of the Armenian Ethiopian community, in order to connect with them and have a historical anecdote with the history of Arbaoth Chuljoch. Take us through history and tell us about the impact of the 40 children that were brought from Jerusalem in 1950, escaping from the victimization of the Armenian genocide in 1915, to come to Ethiopia and have an impact in lots of ways.
At the time, he had an Armenian who works for the palace with the name Abraham Karajan. Abraham Karajan, he had gone to a few times, taking with him letters on behalf of Rastafari. And in 1923, Ethio, the wife of Rastafari, visited Jerusalem with an Armenian lady named Araksi Yazjan. And there they saw the 40 orphans playing the music. And the next year, on his European tour, Rastafari visited Jerusalem, accompanied by Abraham Karajan, and he appointed an envoy in Jerusalem, who made the arrangements with the Patriarch of Jerusalem, Megiddish Patriarch of Jerusalem, and the Arbali George were supposed to come to Ethiopia together with their father, let's say, the priest who had collected them from the deserts of Syria and northern Iraq. And he had brought them to Jerusalem, and in Jerusalem they learned how to play the brass instruments. And Haile Selassie made an agreement, or Rastafari made an agreement with the Patriarch to bring them to Ethiopia. They were known as Arbali George, and Arbali George, their main music teachers, refused to come to Ethiopia. And the Armenian General Benevolent Union at the time advertised in Cairo the need of a bandmaster, and they found Kevork Nalbandian, who is my great uncle. And that was a fortunate thing for Kevork Nalbandian, and also fortunate thing for Ethiopia, because of the development of Ethiopian music is the work of two Nalbandians, Kevork Nalbandian and my father, Nerses Nalbandian. Rastafari had a very political motive also in bringing the Arbali George to Ethiopia. He absolutely wanted to show Ethiopia as an advanced nation, humane nation, unlike what the Italians used to depict Ethiopia as a barbarian country. Of course, they had lost the battle in Adua, and they hadn't taken it very nicely. So the Arbali George came to Ethiopia. They also played the national anthem of Ethiopia and the national anthem of all the dignitaries who came for the coronation of Emperor Haile Selassie on November 2, 1930. And their bandmaster was Kevork Nalbandian, and the composer of the national anthem, Ethiopia Hoy, was my great uncle, Kevork. This is the story of the Arbali George. The Arbali George stayed, all 40 of them stayed in Ethiopia until 1932. In 1932, some of them who had found relatives in Iraq and Syria and Lebanon, they left to join their relatives. The others remained in Ethiopia.
My next question is related to the legacies of the Armenian community here in Ethiopia. It's not only in Ethiopia, it has gone to different parts of the world, because Armenians were ambassadors, the first chauffeurs, the first translators, the first skilled jewelers in Addis and across Ethiopia. And whenever we talk about industries, the Armenians are the ones who gave us the one shoe that we are using, that is Darmar Shoe Factory, which is owned by Ambassa Shoe Factory now. We can go to Hague-based conglomerates, and we can talk about lots of legacies, starting with that of the naming of the first coining of names of the different villages of Addis Ababa. Starting with Saratanya Sefer, we can go to Sabara Babur, and then the Armen Sefer. And these names were coined by Armenians. Do you know about this? And I want you to tell us the history behind the naming and everything related.
The Armenians came to Ethiopia, as I said, started coming to Ethiopia in 1870. In 1895, because of our history, many Armenians came, and a lot of skilled people came to Armenia. In 1902, by the fate of illness, one great engineer ended up in Addis Ababa. His name was Krikor Hovyan. He was a graduate of a building university in Paris, very well known, and he had worked in the Ottoman army as a corps engineer, and he had a lot of experience. So, and when he ended up in Addis Ababa, he was a French citizen at the time, and he built the first 12 bridges of Addis Ababa, and his assistant was Minas Kherbekian, very well known in Ethiopia by his nickname Farashi Minas. And Minas, his first job was to build the bridge on the river Awash all alone as a young man. Krikor Hovyan built Taitu Hotel, the Bullet Factory, the Ministry of Finance building, Betezata Hospital, Menelik Hospital, Teferi Mokonnen School, Menelik School, and a lot of government projects were the work of the two Armenians. And a lot of roads were cleared in Addis Ababa. That was the work of also engineer Krikor Hovyan, Minas Kherbekian, and the third Armenian engineer, whose name is not very well known, Amasya Sukiasyan, who worked in the municipality. He was in charge of drawing the maps, or the kartas, as you say, as we say in Amharic, of the plans of Addis Ababa. And this is from the construction side. So with the 1895 Abdul Hamid massacres in Ottoman Turkey at the time, many Armenians came to join Sarkis Terzian, from the same town, and a few came from Van to join their compatriot Hagop Bagdasaryan, who was brought to Ethiopia by Ras Mokonnen as a jeweler who worked in the palace, and he was the man who started the minting of the Menelik coins. So Hagop Bagdasaryan was sent by Emperor Menelik in 1905 to Vienna, together with another Armenian who had a knowledge with metals, because he was working with the railway company. And they went together to Vienna and brought the machinery and started minting the Menelik coins. So the number of Armenians increased. Ras Mokonnen brought with him embroiders, tailors, shoemakers, carpet makers, and all this worked in the palace. And he also brought to Ethiopia a horticulturalist who is my great uncle from my mother's side. And that's how the family came to Addis Ababa, and my grandmother was born in Addis Ababa in 1905. So I am third generation born in Addis Ababa.
Let's go to the village.
So, as I have heard from my grandmother, who witnessed the growth of Addis Ababa as a child, Addis Ababa started growing circularly around the Gabi, the Menelik Gabi, and it expanded in a circular manner. Emperor Menelik gave the land adjacent to the palace to the races like Ras Beru or Ras Immeru and to his Jazmachas, and beyond that towards the St. George Cathedral, the St. George Church at the time was a very small church, came to the Armenians, particularly beyond the river. It became to the Armenians who were not very close to the Menelik, but worked for the government, like Varam Terzian, Garbis Terzian, Hrant Baghdasaryan, Remont Baghdasaryan, who were on the other side of the river. And on this side of the river where this church is, it was given to the people, to the Armenians who were close, like the land, this land, and the land beyond the building, the Armenian building, there is a small place, was given to Krikor Hovyan as payment to the work he did with the construction of the bridges. And just to add some spice, he was paid with the land and with 40 enjeras a day. So, Krikor Hovyan had no heirs, and he left this land to the Armenian community, which later was purchased by Mihran Muradian from the community. He built the church and donated it back to the Armenian community of Ethiopia. Mihran Muradian was a very successful businessman. Anyway, we will talk about the business people in another interview, most probably. So I'll go forward with the legacies of the Armenians, as you want to hear about how the name of the areas in Addis Ababa, in old Addis Ababa, became, because there was no bridge. The workers were on this side, on the other side of the lake, not this side of the river. So it was divided clearly from the palace. So there was no river Kantu at the time. So the area near St. George Church was called Doromanakia. I don't know why. And below, towards the river, was called Sarratanya Sefer, and the Sarratanya Sefer was called Ribekanto because nobody could hear when somebody was in problem in the area. So. And most of the Sarratanya Sefer, Doromanakia, was built by the Armenians and some Indian families. If you go to the piazza, starting from the bridge, Rasmakonan Bridge, going up to the Gola Square, the house, all the property in the beginning belonged to the Armenians. There was a portion which belonged to the Indian community. There was a portion which belonged to the community on the other side of the road. And it went up to the Sarratanya Sefer, which was all inhabited by Armenians. Avedis Vajan and Sons Company, which I will talk about later in the industrialization part, lived in the Sarratanya Sefer. Arsho Laboratory was his house. You know? Different areas had the names because of Armenians. In 1905, when the railway stopped in the Redawa and didn't advance to Addis Ababa, and the company went bankrupt. Emperor Menelik was very dissatisfied, and his advisor, his warrior, his envoy, Sarkis Terzian, said, "Allow me to go to England, I'll bring a steam engine to Addis Ababa." Emperor Menelik, with this belief that without railroad, how can somebody bring a steam engine to Addis Ababa, he gave him a passport. I have the copy of the passport. On one occasion, I will show it to you. And Terzian, he went to England. He bought the steam engine. He loaded it on a vessel, and he brought it to Djibouti. In Djibouti, it was loaded on the train, brought to the Redawa, unloaded in the Redawa, and he hoped to have it driven to Addis Ababa, but while bringing down from the train, they had damaged the engine, and the engineers in the Redawa couldn't repair it, so they pulled it and pushed it. He hired 300 people, and they brought, and after they passed Awash, Emperor Menelik, with his entourage, went to meet him, and when the Ethiopian flag was seen tied on the steam engine, Emperor Menelik hugged Sarkis Terzian and said, "Tilluku Sarkis." So one of his names is this steam engine, or the vapor engine, Babur, came to Addis Ababa. The first task it did was to clear the road between Addis Ababa and Addis Alem, and was the machine to test the bridges that Krikor-Hovyan made. The first one to go on the machine was Krikor-Hovyan himself or Minas Kherbekyan, and when the bridge was inaugurated, they passed to ensure to the people that it was secured. The bridges have also their story. As you know, Emperor Menelik gave a plot of land on the hills around Addis Ababa to the embassies, but they had no way to go to their embassies during the rainy season, when the Kabana and Gimfile overflow. So the first bridges built were on Kabana, on Gimfile, and on the road to the adjacent to the German embassy. The bridge is still is in use now after 110, 115 years. And it's still strong. All the others went under the new bridges which are built, but they would have survived even the traffic of today. Apart from the churches, apart from the bridges built, they also, Minas and Krikor-Hovyan built some 24 churches. On another occasion, I will specify the names, like Entoto Mariam, Gepi Gabriel, Urael, Rufael, Mitaka Manuel, and others. I have all the list ready. One day we'll talk. So the development of Addis Ababa came with some important efforts from the side of the Armenians. Armenians worked in the palace as accountants, as weavers, as carpet makers, as embroiders, and as tailors, and all these skills came and passed. And the most important, I shouldn't forget, as jewelers, which they passed it to the Ethiopian counterparts. They trained them, and up to now, all are the grandchildren of Armenian jewelers who are making the Ethiopian jewelry. In jewelry making in the old days, as I said, Baghdasaryan, Dikranebeyan, Hagop Baghdasaryan, his brothers Revont and Hrant Baghdasaryan. And then there was Jidejan and Hovannes Parsechian. There were many Armenian jewelers who came to Ethiopia to going into shoemaking. The first shoemakers of Addis Ababa, apart from the experiment Menelik, Emperor Menelik imposed on the Swiss engineer, the first shoemaker who opened a shop in Addis Ababa was an Armenian with the name of Garabed Knadjan. A lot of his compatriots came with the same skill, opening shops in Addis Ababa, and by 1925 there were around 32 shoemakers of Addis Ababa. In the meantime, in 1897, you know, I have to go back and come forward. In 1897, Yesai Garigyan built a tannery in Harar, and he brought experts from Armenia. One of them was Stepan Darakjan. Another one was Manu Kalajan, who were brought to Ethiopia as leather experts. And after 1918, when Yesai Garigyan left back to France, Stepan Darakjan bought the machinery and brought it to Akaki. He started the tanning process in Akaki, and his son, Mardiros Darakjan, established a company called Darmar, which stands for Darakjan Mardiros. Yeah? And he expanded in 1950s, he modernized the tannery completely with modern machinery and modern technology. His son-in-law was an engineer who has designed a beautiful tannery in a beautiful way with everything flowing like a clockwork. And the engineer's name was Haigashen Uzunyan. And the industrialization of Ethiopia started with this. Another industrialist who started a grinding mill in Asko area, as it is known now popularly, was Avedis Svajan and Sons Company, who started the tannery Asko, Avedis Svajan and Sons Company, which means in short Asko. And Asko became the popular name of the area. Now going back to Sabara Babur, in 1915 Sarkis Terzian was assassinated by his cousin, and his Babur remained on the road of Addis Salem, or at that time there was some repair work on the road. So it was stationed there, and because the owner died, there was nobody to care about, and his only son, Avedis Terzian, was in Istanbul studying in university, so the steam engine remained unattended. Some parts were lost during the years, and it was called the Sabara Babur, and the area near the statue of Abuna Petros got the name Sabara Babur because the Babur was there. I have personally seen it. When somebody didn't work properly, especially on construction work, they used to say, "The Sabara Babur tegettira tikum." So don't stand like the broken steam engine.
Now let's go and focus about the Darmar, because the Darmar factory has a lot of relation with Ethiopia. And what about the Hagbes conglomerates? Are they effective in this?
Hagbes, I will come to it. Industrialization of Addis Ababa in the beginning started by the Armenians, later the Greeks, and after that the Italians came into the picture as well. I should differentiate between the different communities. The Armenian community was a refugee community. The Greek community was economic migrants, and the Italians were colonizing community. Of course, the ones remaining didn't colonize anything, but they were the descendants, many of them were the descendants of the soldiers captured by Emperor Menelik in Adwa. Anyway, to cut it a bit short, the industrialization of Addis Ababa, of Ethiopia, started by the Armenians. The first grinding mill, apart from the steam engine of Sarkis Terzian, which was grinding grain in Addis Ababa during its spare time when it was not doing the roadworks, because it had a part which did that job. The first grinding mills one was near Gıbbi with Menelik Gıbbi, which the Italians had started during the Italian occupation, and it was taken over by the Besnilian family, Samuel Besnilian and his sons, including Hagop Besnilian, which is Hagop Besnilian, who was the husband of my aunt, my father's sister. And Hagbes grew in different ways, in business, in industry. But the Besnilian brothers, when their grinding mills was taken over by the garage of Emperor Haile Selassie, they left to Bishoftu, where they built a flour mill. It was a family affair, but Hagbes was excluded from the family joint efforts. So Hagbes always, Hagop Besnilian, always wanted to have the flour mill, and his sons built next to the father's flour mill another flour mill and a macaroni factory, and which was nationalized during the Derg regime. Another industry which the Armenians introduced in Ethiopia is the printing industry. The Jerahian brothers, Elias and George, they started their own printing press. Before that, even there was Rand Baghdasaryan, who had attempted to do the prints, and Kevor Kaznavorian, he had printed Courrier d'Ethiopie, French newspaper in Addis Ababa, and later he worked for artistic printers. Artistic printers was found by, again, my great uncles from my mother's side, Elias and George Jerahian, and they were the pioneers in that business. Their business expanded during the Italian occupation, and after that they built new facilities, modern facilities, and they had the stationery opened, and it served the people of Addis Ababa. The second printing press was built by Suren Chakrian in the late 1940s, which was the commercial printing press, which was also nationalized by the Derg. And Aslanian brothers, Torkom and Bedros and Torkom, they established the central printing press, and then later they went into paper converting. So Ethiopian paper converting company was the work of the two brothers and another Armenian, Hovannes Kalpakian. The wood industry, one of the pioneers in the wood industry was Vasken Sisyan. He worked with Mosvold in the beginning, and then he started his own business. He had vast areas near Jimma from where he brought the wood and treated it for the telephone and electric poles. He was a pioneer in that line of business, a very entrepreneurial person. Well, many Armenians were entrepreneurial, they built a lot of things.
My next question is related to the connectedness through the Orthodox Orientalism. One thing that relates the two countries is Oriental Orthodoxy. And for someone who doesn't know much about Oriental Orthodoxy, what are the basic similarities and differences in between the two church histories? And let's talk about the structure, the leadership, and the practices between the two churches. What are the similarities and differences? Tell us about it.
The two churches are connected with the belief of monophysitism. Ethiopians, you call it Tawahado. We call it Miapnak. Monophysitism is the belief in the divine nature of Christ. So this is the basis of the faith of both churches, which has started in the 4th century, around 350 AD, and it continues today. In the year 451, at the Council of Chalcedon, there was a debate about the Christological debate, which the two churches rejected from day one. And this is the second aspect, that the two churches are in the same family. The third unknown factor is Ethiopian monks visiting Jerusalem did not find any hospitality from the other denominations. They only found support from the Armenian monastery in Jerusalem. Especially in the Middle Ages, when Armenia was part of the Ottoman Empire, the Ottomans, who had already also controlled Jerusalem, Armenians had a lot of privileges in Jerusalem, and they supported the Ethiopians all the way through. So this is another aspect of the reasons that the two people have an affinity towards each other. And as far as differences are concerned, I don't see any much difference between the two. Of course, there is the obvious difference of the two churches, that's language. We use Armenian, ancient Armenian mostly, and the Ethiopian Orthodox Church uses Ge'ez. So on the ancient part, we are alike, but the languages are completely different. And the other significant difference is the Ethiopian Orthodox Church has an altar which is closed like the Coptic Church, whereas the Armenian Church has an open altar, except for the Lent period when we close the altar. Today I have opened it for your sake, because tomorrow we are going to open it in any way. So this is the similarities. And then structurally, the leadership of the church, with the unfortunate history of the Armenian nation becoming under the rule of stronger powers, starting the 11th century to today, to the 20th century, Armenians were under the Seljuk, the Tatars, the Ottoman Turks, and so Armenia was always under the rule of somebody. So the country split into two, Eastern Armenia and Western Armenia. The modern Armenian also divided into two different dialects, the Eastern Armenian dialect and the Western Armenian dialect. We understand each other 100%, but the grammar is completely different. We in the West have lost some sounds. They have kept all the sounds. We have kept more ancient words. They have modernized the language. So there are differences in the language. apart from the language, our church was divided because of the politics in the 13th century, the 14th century. Since the 14th century, we were forced to bring the Holy See of Echmiadzin into Cilicia to Sis, where Ethio Statios met the end of his life, and he was buried by the head of the Armenian Church, the Catholicos, in Sis. The two churches were unique in venerating three saints, three particular saints. The first one is Saint Ripsime, which you Ethiopians call, or we Ethiopians call, Arsema. Gregory the Illuminator, the patron saint and the first leader of the Armenian Apostolic Church. And the third, we venerate, the Armenian Church and the Ethiopian Church venerate, is Ethio Statios, Saint Eustatios. So this is another part of the similarity. And in the 20th century, with the creation of the USSR, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic, Armenia was part of it. So the rest of the Armenians who were in the diaspora, they kept the Cilicia Sea alive, which grew in Lebanon, in Antilles, in Beirut, near Beirut, and that was one holy see on the side of the main holy see of Echmiadzin, which is 25 kilometers from Yerevan, the capital of Armenia, which was the first built church by Gregory the Illuminator, who had seen the vision and built the church there. And there is also nearby Echmiadzin, there is the Saint Ripsime, the tombstone of Saint Ripsime, on which a church has been built in her honor, in her name. So one day perhaps you should go and visit Arsema, and as it is known, she is the patron for marriage and children, no? In it. So the hierarchy of the church, as I said, we have two heads of the churches. In Armenian, they are called Catholicos. And we have two patriarchs, a patriarch in Jerusalem and a patriarch in Constantinople, Istanbul. And these are very old establishments, established in the 7th centuries or even earlier, which exist up to now, and they are on the rank of patriarchs. Apart from that, the Holy See of Echmiadzin has its own archbishops, bishops, reverends, novices, and deacons. And similarly, the Holy See of Antilles has the same ranking in its church. In every aspect, they are 100% similar. Language, only because of politics, we have two leadership.
As we are celebrating Easter after Lent, I want you to tell us about the church practices. Let's focus more on the similar church practices between the two churches, Armenian Church and Ethiopian Orthodox Church, in order to focus more about the week that gave us Easter, and the Easter days, Easter Mondays to Friday, and the Easter Sunday. And what are the practices and what is expected from the believer on this day?
The Lent starts 2 days before the celebrations known as Mardi Gras, which is on a Tuesday, 45 days before Easter. But the Lent for us Armenians starts 2 days before, on the Sunday. And it goes for 7 weeks up to Easter. The 40 days of Lent signifies the 40 days of our Lord Jesus Christ going to the desert and being tempted by Satan, and he's coming back to Jerusalem. So all these 40 days signified that. And the last week, which is the Holy Week, will be the 7th week for the Armenian churches, and Ethiopia has 1 week extra because you call it the King's Week, or the King's Lent, የንጉሥ ጾም. So the difference is between the ንጉሥ ጾም and without the ንጉሥ ጾም. So otherwise everything is the same. The celebrations start with Hosanna, which signifies the coming of Jesus to Jerusalem, and he's being received as a prophet, as a king, as a savior, which also was not taken very well by the authorities of the time. And we have, because of which we have Easter. So in Armenian, we call the Holy Week Avak Shapat, which means the Great Week, which shows the teaching, which is connected with the teachings, with the crucifixion, with the entombment, and with the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So the whole week there are celebrations. Easter Monday is dedicated to the creation of heaven and earth for the second coming of Jesus Christ, with which we have to prepare ourselves for the final salvation. Holy Tuesday, or Easter Tuesday, is dedicated to the 10 maidens, the 5 smart and the 5 foolish maidens, explained in the Matthew Gospel, verse 25 from 1 to 13, where these 10 maidens, 5 of them were smart and were waiting for their bridegrooms, and the bridegrooms were late, and 5 smart ones had their lamps with reserve oil, and the 5 others didn't have the reserve oil, so their lamps were extinguished and they couldn't meet their suitors, whereas the others, they went and they joined the celebrations of the marriage. This is the Easter Wednesday. The Easter Tuesday, it is the teaching of the fig tree which didn't bear fruits, which signifies, which shows that one has to have devotion and patience and faith, and when to wait for the fig tree to give fruit, as if someone who has the faith can even move mountains. So we come to Easter Thursday. That's the heaviest day of celebrations in the Armenian church, and I'm sure in the Ethiopian church. I have not been lucky enough to visit the Ethiopian church because I have always been in charge here, helping our priests as a deacon. So the Thursday morning is the establishment of the new covenant, which is the Holy Communion, which was established by Jesus Christ during the Last Supper, when he cut the bread, divided it to his apostles, and he drank from the wine from his chalice and gave it to his apostles. And Later, it became the Holy Communion, the body and the blood of our Lord Jesus Christ, which will put us into the kingdom of God. In the afternoon of the Thursday, there is the feet washing celebration. As Jesus Christ washed the feet of his students, it showed his humility and his love towards his. And the same is done by the priest in the church. Members, especially youngsters, are invited to the altar to have their feet washed. So that ceremony, after that ceremony, there is the Thursday vigil, we call it, which starts, which lasts the whole night. During that period, there is the laments, 6 laments, and after each lament there is a gospel read on the altar, which is closed with a black curtain. 12 candles are lit, 11 white candles, 1 black candle representing Judas, and these are extinguished in pairs after each reading of the gospel, which follows a lament, and the ceremony lasts the whole night until early morning. And on the Friday during noon is the entombment of Jesus Christ, and late in the evening, in the chancel of the church, where in the middle of the church, a tomb is decorated, psalms are read, laments are sung, and the tomb goes around the church, and all the believers follow it, and they come under the tomb into the church, and it is placed on, and everybody kisses the gospel on the tomb and takes a flower from the decoration and goes home. Then there is the vigil of the Saturday evening, which signifies the resurrection of Jesus Christ. When the ceremony starts, the church is completely dark. It's usually done towards the evening. It's dark, except with the deacons reading from the Messiahs. The one before the last, which is the Daniel, is Isaiah's verse 60, which talks about the light being lit upon the believers of God, and then all the lights of the church go up. And after that, the Mass, after the reading of Daniel, and the Mass starts. I just left one day out, I think. That day is the Wednesday, the Easter Wednesday, where a fallen lady approaches Jesus Christ and anoints his feet and kisses his feet, and his apostles chase her for doing that, and Jesus says, no, it shows her devotion. It is very important to show devotion, and Jesus Christ took it as the anointment for him before his burial. So I think I explained all the ceremonies of the week. Of course, the Sunday Mass is the joyous Mass of Jesus Christ's resurrection, and the Lent is over, and for the next 40 days there are no fasting or saints days until the ascension of Christ, 40 days being on the earth after his resurrection. You know, I'm not a theological scholar, but because of many years of serving the church, more or less I know this, and I tried to find out if I was okay with the subject. We in Armenian say Christos ariavi merelots, ortniale harutun Christosi, on the day of the Sunday, which is translated, Jesus is risen from the dead, blessed be the rising of Jesus, is the translation of the words, and this is how we greet each other all over the world, Armenians all over the world. Easter is celebrated in our Armenian Church. Unfortunately, this year we will not have celebrations because Archbishop of Cairo, who is also our primate, he was operated last week, and he until yesterday he was sure to come. Yesterday evening his doctor said it's better if you don't travel and you don't stress the operation because it's quite a big area. So I will do my best to satisfy the believers with my simple prayers.
My final question brings me to your sense of Ethiopianness. What's Ethiopia to you? Is it a place of refuge? Is it a place of sense of togetherness, sense of community? Is it a place of happiness and worship? Tell us about it.
So I come to the last question, which has a very, very short reply. Ethiopia is my home. Ethiopia is my country. I am Ethiopian.
Deacon Varkas Nalbaldian, if you have a shout out, if you want to say happy holidays to your friends and families, now's your time.
Since 1977, when our father passed away at a very reasonably young age, at the age of 62, my family and me, we dedicated ourselves to keep this church alive, open, because the priests used to come and go, and we became the constant part of this church, and we keep it going until now. Because of my responsibilities, or the responsibilities I've taken in church, I came close to the history of Armenians in Ethiopia, and because it's a history which is not written and it cannot continue as an oral tradition, I decided to write a book. In 2018 I was in Canada for medical checkups, which lasted over a year, and my spare time I sat down and wrote the books. The books are intended for the new generation of Ethiopia to see the history of Ethiopia from an independent body who has been the part of that history. And I thought I have done a reasonable job, because the Amharic version of my book is a very, very good book. Unfortunately, I didn't have the Amharic to translate it myself, but Getana did a very, very good job. I edited the Amharic version myself, and I prefer it to the English version, which is available on Amazon. My book in English is I Want to Die with a Flag, and in Amharic is Bandira Sainoren Indalmot, Kantu Hulme in Asakakane. I wish all Christians a happy Easter. As we say in Armenian, I will repeat it, Jesus Christ is risen from the dead. Let the rising of Christ be blessed. In Armenian, Christos Hariavi Merelots, Ortnyale Harutiona Christosi.
Deacon Vatkas Nalbaldian, thank you for blessing us with your time. You have gave us everything that we have never expected from the history of the Armenian community towards that of Ethiopia. The connectedness starts with the 16th century. It has gone back to the Emperor Haile Selassie period, and it's still continuing. We have seen the connectedness in industries, we have seen the connectedness in religious activities and social relatedness as well. Thank you for blessing us, and thank you as well for staying with us, and happy holidays to you all.
Thank you, Asagud, for giving me this opportunity. I hope in future, if you have any interesting programs to show the history of Armenians in Ethiopia, I will volunteer to sit with you.
That's all that we've got for you in this special edition that focused on Esther. And I hope you loved the conversation that I had with Deacon Vatkas Nalbaldian. He gave us such an insight towards the Armenian community who have lived here for long, and the connectedness emanates from the religious, social, and economic connection that we have with the Armenian community. I hope you loved it. Happy Easter with all your loved ones. And it's a goodbye from me, the producer, Asakar Mulgeta.